Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It is so wonderful to be back in Taipei. I want to first congratulate the organizers and founders involved with Taipei Art Week and also the coming Taipei Biennale. So congratulations to all of you, and as well to the curators and artists and of course dealers who make up this fantastic ecology. I also just really want to thank Rudy Tseng for being such a friend to me and to the Guggenheim since the founding of the Asian Art Initiative now 20 years ago. And also for always hosting me so graciously here in Taiwan, and for your extraordinary advocacy of the artists from Taiwan around the world. The theme for today's forum is Coming from Asia to the World, and I think this is personifies Rudy's work. So thank you from all of us. We're so grateful and so indebted to your passion for the contemporary art of Taiwan. I also want to congratulate Claudia Chen. Thank you so much for hosting us today. And to my colleagues at the Taipei Art Forum, Viola Yao and Eva Lin, who will be meeting shortly. So we are coming upon the 20th anniversary of the Asian Art Initiative at the Guggenheim Museum. I thought it would be, it offers an occasion to look back and share with all of you what our curatorial methodology has been for the project of installing a curatorial position, a collection strategy, and an exhibition program at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And of course, that program has also had tremendous impact on the Guggenheim Bilbao, which has had several major exhibitions of contemporary art from Asia, as well as the upcoming Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which I will be speaking about shortly. So the work that we have done at the Asian Art Initiative has really infiltrated and begun to shape the entire global outlook and program of the Guggenheim Museum as a global institution. And I want to share today sort of what my methodology has been and that of my colleagues, and what we consider to be a kind of activism. I like to say, Goethe said, the purpose of life is to have an argument. And I feel that I have devoted my life to an argument. And that argument is, how can we expand and interrogate the fundamental history of modernism as it had been so entrenched in Western museums and the academy? How can we expand, explode, reinvent, interrogate that canon to incorporate the art and thought, discourse, and histories of art from Asia over the modern period and into the contemporary? So let me begin by saying in what the sort of formulation of some of this has been. In 1960, the Japanese thinker Takeuchi Yoshimi delivered his famous lecture, Asia as Method, in Tokyo. He critiqued Japan and China's early modernization policies for being overly concerned with the West. If the goal of Asian modernization is to achieve global equality, he wrote, Asia must learn how to universalize its own cultural values, what he called Asia as method. He wrote in this famous lecture, "The Orient must change the West in order to further elevate those universal values that the West itself has produced. This is the main problem facing East-West relations today, and it is at once a political and cultural issue. When this rollback takes place, we must have our own cultural values. And yet, perhaps these values do not already exist in substantive form. Rather, I suspect they are possible as a method, that is to say, as the process of the subject's self-formation. This is what I have called Asia as method." So, over the last 35 years of my work, I have adopted Takeuchi's Asia as method theory and sought to apply it to my studies of Japanese, Chinese, and Korean art in a global context. This is what the theme is of, again, this forum, starting from Asia, looking at the world. So to use the theory and methodology and discourse of a major Asian thinker, starting from Asia and looking at the world, this is what I think is extremely important. We can't just rely on critics from the West or art historians of the West to define the histories that are emerging from Asia. We need our own theoreticians to approach the problems that are particular and unique to the conditions that arise here. When I began my research on post-war Japanese art back in the mid-1980s, I was virtually the only curator working in an American museum who believed then in the importance and potential of this art historical subject. I literally was turned away from Columbia University graduate school because it's like, we don't do modern. There's no such thing as modern Asian art. I literally had to go to the history department at NYU to get my PhD because there was no one in America who would take a PhD in modern Asian art. It was uncharted territory. At the time, Asian art museums and university departments in the US had no programs in post-1900 20th century art history, with experts dismissing the 20th century as an irreconcilable rupture with tradition and hence irrelevant to the formation of Asian art. Likewise, at the time, modern art by Asian artists was not studied or collected in American universities or museums because their work was considered peripheral, derivative, or belated relative to the modern art project in the West. I mean, this sounds like ancient history, but this is what I had to fight for. It makes me feel very old because today we're all here and it's all common language, but then in the 80s and 90s, it was not. I held passionate conviction in the legitimacy of this history and the vitality of this new field, and believed that new perspectives based on rigorous scholarship would eventually force changes on these fierce biases. Takeuchi's inversion that modernity in Asia was not a rupture, but a process of forging new forms of regional culturally identity on a global level inspired my way forward. So now, looking back 30 years, I can see that my early instincts were part of a larger sea change. Over the last 3 decades, geopolitical and theoretical shifts have produced new ways of mapping modern art history and contemporary cultural practices, connecting geographically scattered movements through a model that the Indian anthropologist Arjuna Appadadai calls transnationalism. And according to his theory, modern societies are defined less by fixed identities of nation states than by the dynamic intercultural flows between people of different nationalities. Wars, colonialism, migrations, tourism, global capitalism, and trade have all radically altered the social and territorial formation of cultural identity. This generous, messy, unpredictable phenomenon is what Appadadai has called modernity at large. Like Takeuchi's framework, Appadadai's framework has helped me forge the field of global art history with a focus on Japan, China, and Korea. So since I began the work of starting from Asia, looking at the world, the international field of modern and contemporary Asian art has matured in the museum and the academy, with now we have an advanced bibliography, sophisticated discourse, and even, as we will see this week, a robust international art market. Since inception, we have all come a long way, but there is still a lot of work to do. Today, focusing on the work of the Guggenheim, I'd like to look back at the work that we have done at the Asian Art Initiative over the last 20 years and revisit some of the arguments behind several of our exhibitions. Each of our projects has aimed to disrupt Western institutional art historical norms with a radical and rigorous transcultural approach to modern and contemporary art history, arguing where Asia is central, not peripheral, to the articulation of the culture of our times. These approaches link to other currents at work today. For example, Glissant's model of reciprocity, the interest of indigenous belief systems as a countermeasure to Enlightenment epistemologies, and of course, the enormously influential discourse grounded in decolonial or post-colonial critiques. What's amazing at the Guggenheim is that Asia was with us from the beginning. This is the opening of the Guggenheim Museum, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, opened in 1959. And on the floor of the Guggenheim, we have Brancusi, sculptures by Brancusi, as well as this painting by the Japanese abstract artist Takeo Yamaguchi, which is very interesting that already in the 1950s, leading up to the opening, there was a great interest in global and international art. But we had no scholars. So this painting was in storage for 60 years before I first exhibited it in one of my exhibitions. But there was early collecting, and it was interesting that in the American minds of the 1950s, there was already a sense of a kind of universalism, especially around the language of abstract art. And then we have the Asian Art Initiative, which I founded in 2006. And at the time, I was the first curator in a U.S. art museum that was charged with building up a collection, again, strategy, exhibition program, and curatorial department devoted to mapping the art from Asia in a global context, in the context of the histories that were already embedded and celebrated in the Guggenheim Museum, which was founded very much as a Eurocentric institution, again, in the 1950s. We have built a curatorial team over the years. Some of these curators are now working internationally. My colleague today is Kyung An, who is curator now of the Asian Art Initiative, very active. She did a beautiful exhibition of Korean art of the 1970s. Sandini Podar was my first hire curator back in 2008 with a specialty in South Asian art. She organized 4 exhibitions of the art from South Asia and is now working with us as an adjunct curator for Guggenheim Abu Dhabi with a focus on South Asia. I think many of you know Xiaoyu Wang Xiaoyu, who was our curator for the Robert H.N. Ho Family Foundation Chinese Art Initiative, which we launched in 2012 and was active for about 10 years. She is now on the Documenta team, so we're very proud. She's working with Naomi Beckwith, chief curator of the Guggenheim Museum for the next edition of Documenta in Kassel, Germany. And I think you all know Share Drew Noel as well, who was with us for about 8 years, working with me on my the China Avant-Garde, on the China Art and China exhibition and other initiatives. And she is now the artistic director of Rockbund. So we feel very proud in the curators who have come through. And we've also had a very robust internship program, including an internship program formerly in collaboration with the Ministry of Culture here in Taiwan in the early 2010s. This is a list of the exhibitions that we have done. This is pretty rigorous. In 20 years, we've had almost as many, close to 20 exhibitions, maybe not quite, but this does not include the exhibitions that we have toured internationally, because several of our shows have also traveled to Guggenheim Bilbao, for example, and other shows have traveled to San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, to the National Museum of Modern Art and Contemporary Art in Taipei. And I'm working now on an exhibition of Mariko Mori that will open at the Mori Art Museum next year. We are very committed to scholarship. Our books, some of which have been bilingual, have won all kinds of awards. We take our scholarship very seriously with both the retrospective exhibition catalogs and the group exhibition catalogs. We have to make an argument, and the argument has to be made in fact. And those facts have to be framed with a rigorous and compelling theoretical framework so that we can persuade our colleagues, both at the institutions where we work and internationally, again, of the arguments that we're making and the importance of the artists whose works that we are advocating for. We also would be speaking in a vacuum if we did not have press. And it's been very important and very interesting to chart how the critics have been educated as well by our work. The critics in the 1980s, when I first started, knew nothing. They hated all my exhibitions. They said they were derivative, they were belated. Why should we care? Insult after insult. But it has taken 20, 30 years to educate our critics to the importance of expanding the histories of modern and contemporary art to include voices from first Asia and increasingly, of course, from Latin America, from Africa, from the Middle East. So we have been part of a much wider movement, a wider advocacy for what is now well established as a global art history. But this has been a very a long process. But I would say that Asia has taken the lead, and the success that the Asian art exhibitions and criticism and publications has benefited for example, the rising art scholarship around arts from the Middle East, or even from arts from Africa. We have kind of opened the floodgates, and we now have a very robust press, and of course supported by an extraordinary flourishing of biennials around the world. Again, when I started, there were like 4 biennials. In the 1990s, there began an explosion of biennials, including in Taipei, including Yokohama, including Shanghai, including Queensland, including then Guangzhou. And then it's just extraordinary. And now Aichi as well. None of these existed. All of these biennials have also been an extremely important platform as part of this history, as part of this, telling of a much broader story of the excitement around and the achievements of global art today. So I'm just going to walk us through some of the exhibitions that we have done in chronological order. This is my first show was Saigo Chang, his first retrospective in an American museum, and this traveled to Bilbao, but a version of it came to Taipei. At the Taipei Fine Arts Museum back in 2010, I believe. And that was an extraordinary exhibition. Also, sorry, we'd also went to Beijing during the Olympics. We presented Tsai's show during the opening events of the Beijing Olympics in August of 2008. This is an exhibition, The Third Mind, American artists looking at Asia. This was a big historical argument where a group of scholars and I looked at the history of the influence of Asian art, aesthetics, materiality, and most importantly, philosophy, metaphysics, and in some cases, even actual religious practices such as Zen and Tibetan Buddhism on American artists spanning the late 19th centuries to roughly 1989. And I'm very proud that Techin Xie's one-year performance was featured in this exhibition in a whole gallery devoted to artists who were working with different conceptions of time and body and endurance. And in this exhibition, which featured several artists, Asian American artists, including Yoko Ono as well, including Nam June-paik, including Shigeko Kubota, and of course Techin Xie, we were arguing that many of the primary arguments, the primary conditions, primary ideas of modernism were somehow rooted to artists' engagement with ideas from Asia, specifically East Asia. And one of these, of course, is art as experience, art as a transmission from of a kind of a mind transmission, which is a very Asian idea, a very grounded again in philosophical thought. And before that, art was didactic. Art was a picture of reality on the wall. Even the Impressionists, it was still art as related to reality. Art is a depiction of something that was, and it was a hierarchical. The artwork talked to you, and you learned from the artwork. This has, of course, origins in religious and all kinds of didactic art grounded in the Western tradition. And then with the advent of abstraction, even with the the great thesis of Kandinsky's of 1909 concerning the spiritual and abstract art, we have to remember that Vasily Kandinsky was a theosophist, and theosophy was based on Tibetan Buddhism. And ideas of Tibetan Buddhism, that art can be an experience of transcendence. Art is an experience that should be geared to change the mind, to change the outset of a state of being. It's not just an intellectual process, but it is a cognitive development. All of these ideas can be traced to ideas that were grounded in East Asian thought, so we argued for that in that exhibition. Another exhibition was a one-person show, a major commission by the Indian-British artist Anish Kapoor, featuring this extraordinary work that weighed many, many tons. That also traveled to, we did the first retrospective in the United States, North America, of Li Yufan, positioning him as at the forefront of several ideas that are related broadly to conceptual and minimalist art, but from the position of an artist from Korea who lived and worked in Japan and France and was working out issues of materiality, of space, of time, of abstraction, of gesture, very much grounded equally in ideas of Western phenomenology and East Asian practices, as well as responding to the geopolitical conditions of modernity, urbanization, reconstruction in Japan. Being Singular Plural was presented in 2012, curated by my colleague Sandini Podar. This was an exhibition of several moving image artists, film-based artists, video-based artists, sound-based artists from South Asia, including this extraordinary installation by Amar Kanwar, who many of you know has been featured in many documenta and biennial exhibitions around the world. And this work also came into the Guggenheim collection. Another exhibition that was curated by Sandini Podar was a one-person show of the Indian American artist Zarina Hashmi, artist who was born in Lahore, traveled around Europe in the 1950s and 60s and settled in New York in the early 1970s. And this exhibition that was also organized by the Hammer Museum at UCLA really sought to position Zarina as one of the very early female artists, again working in a larger language of minimalism, of almost performative practice of stitching, of weaving, of poking, working in a highly monochrome language, and also very, very autobiographical. And this is an artist who was raised during the partition of India and Pakistan, and much of her work has to do with longing and belonging, and so ideas of identity, both as a woman and as a displaced South Asian and displaced Muslim artist, also were ideas that we sought to articulate in the exhibition and the catalog. And since this exhibition, Zarina has also had an extraordinary explosion of interest in her work, but with collections in museums, exhibitions worldwide. When I came to the Guggenheim, the first thing that we did at the Asian Art, as part of the Asian Art Initiative, was to establish an Asian Art Council, which was a group of artists, museum directors, and academics, mainly working in Asia, who we could call upon for ideas, to build a network and a community to help us establish a much broader conversation about modern and contemporary Asian art in contemporary practice. One of the outcomes of that was establishing a major initiative that was funded by UBS Bank, a global arts initiative. This global arts initiative had 3 exhibitions. Each one of the exhibitions was came with a curator. We hired a specialist for 3 different regions of the world to come and be a resident with us at the Guggenheim to create an exhibition. And what was fantastic about those shows was everything in the show, thanks to UBS, entered our collection. Because when I came at the Guggenheim, our collection was still predominantly Western art. And it would take me a century to build the collection to kind of equal the curatorial work that we were doing. So this was an opportunity, a strategy, collection strategy, to both advance scholarship, advance understanding of art from these 3 different regions, but also so that everything could come into the collection. So the 3 regions were South and Southeast Asia, curated by June Yap, who is based in Singapore. The second iteration was the Middle East and North Africa, curated by Sarah Raza, who just recently became the director of the Tashkent Contemporary Art Museum. And the third was Latin America, and the curator was Pablo Leon de la Barra, who is based in Brazil and who is still working with the Guggenheim. And in each one of these exhibitions, we were able to really benefit from the curatorial expertise of someone from the region, and also from the networks and the communities that they introduced us to, who could now feel that the Guggenheim was part of their home. This is another exhibition that Sandini Podar curated, devoted to the great Indian abstract artist, modernist, V.S. Gaitonde. And then another major initiative that some of you might remember was our collaboration with the Robert H. Ho Family Foundation that was then based in Hong Kong. We did a $10 million 10-year project with them, where we again brought in a curator. Xiaoyu Wang and Ho Han Ru were our curators that we hired for this project, and they curated 3 exhibitions featuring solo artists and group shows over a 7-year period. And the beauty of those shows was that every work was commissioned, and those commissions also entered our collection. So that was a brilliant strategy and idea where it allowed us to work with emerging artists. This is Zhou Tao, who did a fantastic video for us, but we also worked with Chao Fei. Let's see who else we worked with. Hold on here. Wang Jiangwei, Duan Jianyu, Ling Yilin, and Samsung Yong and Wang Ping. And we also had the great honor of working with Cha and Zhao here from Taipei, who was one of our artists in one of these shows, along with the Yangjiang group and Sung Yuan and Peng Yo. So this was also a really important initiative for us that had a very robust online presence, education presence, outreach, and again, help build an incredible network with artists, museums, and institutions and foundations in Asia. I then just want to speak a little bit about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which will open next year in 2026. This is a rendering, but it's now 90% built in Abu Dhabi. For those of you who are going to Abu Dhabi, travel there, you will, now see the amazing museum going up. I have been honored to be a founding curator of this project, and I led the project for 5 years, from 2018 to 2023. Our collection is 30% Asian. That's pretty good. 30% Asian, and 50% from the region. 50% of the collection and 50% of our collection display at any one time will be art from what we call West Asia, which is the Gulf, the Levant, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, North Africa, and South Asia, which includes Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and India. And our holdings in this area are really deep. The 3 pillars of the collection and the program at Guggenheim Abu Dhabi are art from 1960. We chose 1960 because it is a date that is really the launch of what we can call global art history. You might think, why not 1945, the end of the World War II? But you can go to a lot of countries in the world and you say post-war, and they say, which war? For those of us in East Asia, and especially here in Taiwan, we know post-war. But honestly, 1960, for countries who were experiencing certainly Western colonialism, Western imperialism, this is the decade, the 1950s is the decade of liberation and independence movements and the end of the colonial era that had begun, those independence movements, of course, beginning with the partition, with the end of the English rule in 1947 in the subcontinent. So we felt that those movements and the whole kind of decolonial episodes and the discourses and the art and the movements and the radicality that was emerging in the region around 1960 provides the museum with a very powerful periodization, a threshold. The other major idea, pillar for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is transnationalism. So this is what I've been speaking of, is the transnationalism. And the third main pillar is art from the region. So really launching and positioning the work of our museum in the positionality, in the artworks, in the creativity, in the innovation of artists from the region. Let me just spend the next few minutes that I have talking about 3 exhibitions in depth that we have presented at the Guggenheim as part of the Asian Art Initiative. One of them is the Gutai Splendid Playground that some of you saw, that was created by Ming Tianpo and myself. And the argument here was to present Gutai, which is arguably Japan's most rambunctious, most extraordinary, most innovative post-war avant-garde movement, presenting it again in a very broad global context, and arguing for how several Gutai artists, through the different exhibitions that they staged, some of them outdoors as early as 1955, were at the forefront of experimentation that only a decade later was beginning to develop in the West. For example, environmental art that you see here, this extraordinary work by Motonaga Sadamasa. This was the opening where many of the living artists of Gutai, many of them have since passed away, were with us. So very, very historic opening. It makes me sad to look because several have left us. But this is the story of Jiro Yoshihara, who was, of course, the founder of Gutai, a modernist abstract painter who in 1952 founded the Gutai movement in Ashiya in the Kansai region, and brought together over a course of 24 years a group of very young artists, most of whom had never been to art school, around the concept of play and around the concept of innovation, around the concept of do what has never been done before, throwing off the yoke of tradition, of convention, of wartime Japan, of orthodoxies, of modernism, but also the orthodoxies of social realism and other forms of art that were then dominant in Japan. And this kind of collectivism, we're arguing, was also extremely advanced for its age. There was also a use of body, children's art, interactive art, children, where the public is invited to come and make art as part of the installation. Amazing work. I mean, before Rauschenberg's famous all-white canvas, where he painted nothing on the canvas and called it art, we had Tanaka Atsuko, who just hung 3 sheets of yellow cloth and hung them on the wall with a fan at the bottom. This is materiality as art. This is like conceptual art avant la lettre. And of course, Shiraga, who is throwing away the paintbrush, throwing away the brain, arguing and making this rambunctious, extraordinary work with his feet in the viscous materiality of the paint itself, introducing performance and embodiment into the act of making art before someone like Yves Klein did. Shimamoto Shozo, of course, making a painting just by cracking, bottles of paint against the, let's see, and then of course technology. Atsuko Tanaka's electric dress, where Gutai also had an incredible whole through line of art and technology well before some of the work that was appearing in Europe or America by the 1960s. And then, of course, they also had an incredible journal, which they sent, for example, to Jackson Pollock in 1954, saying, "Look at us, here we are." So the incredible audacity that they had to position themselves as an international movement was also one of the hallmarks of Gutai. And this work was all part of our... okay. I'm just going to do some quick exhibition views here. This exhibition won all kinds of awards. Next exhibition is Art in China after 1989. I think some of you saw that. This exhibition traveled to San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, as well as Bilbao. I think, Rudy, you were there for the opening. It was based and came out of 2 or 3 very intensive workshops, one of which we held in Bangkok with many different art historians such as Wu Hong, Zheng Shengtian, Ho Han Ru, where we were working out the thesis, the periodization of the show. We had held another workshop in Hangzhou at the Hangzhou Art Academy with many of our colleagues there. and then a final one in Beijing with Fan Dian, Zheng Shangtian, Chou Zhijie, and others. This exhibition I curated with Phil Tenari and Ho Han Ru, and it resulted in quite an important controversial exhibition. Our argument was that we were periodizing a certain strain of conceptual art and performance art from China from 1989 to 2008. We were looking at artists born in China who were working abroad, but unfortunately we did not include Taiwan in that study. We were very focused on artists who were conditioned specifically by the Reform era, the failure of the Reform era, Deng Xiaoping's policies, Tiananmen massacre and the outcome of that, as well as the larger conditions following the other huge events of 1989, which of course are the end of the Cold War, the invention of the World Wide Web, the fall of apartheid in South Africa. So really using 1989 as an enormous threshold for studying this period of artists asking themselves, what is meaning? What is ideology? What is history? What is a built environment when so much is changing so rapidly around us? What is identity? There was a strong strain of, atheism, godlessness, and yet some humor as well. This was a very powerful show, of course, featuring major works also by Huang Yongping, Chen Zhen, Xu Bing, and featuring, of course, the great show of 1989 that was shut down 4 days after it opened. Incredible Gudaxing early work that was in the 89 show. Zhang Pei Li. What Pi Li might be talking when he shows up, Wu Shangjiang, about his upcoming shows at Taikun that are going to be like part 2 and 3 of this exhibition. He's, I think, calling it also Art in China and calling it after 2008. So he's taking our periodization at Taikun and evolving it to a new period. But this was a major history arguing for these artists, not only within a very specific history coming out of China, but also as a global art history. This is the first wave of Chinese artists to really be featured in this whole group of a whole rise of international biennials. This is all your friends. There's Ling Lin. This is Reb Koolhaus and his project. And then this amazing last room with Gudaxing's work, very, very powerful, based on Lu Xun's work. Then my final, I just have a minute or two left, is I wanted to share with you the exhibition I did last year at the Venice Biennial, devoted to the work of Yu Hong, the Chinese artist. I was very interested in placing the work of Yu Hong, who was born in 1966, trained at the Chinese Art Academy, in the tradition of European realism that had its origins with artists like Caravaggio in Rome and in Venice. I was very interested in placing her work in the context of European painting. We selected this beautiful church, the Chiesetta della Misericordia, and presented this series of paintings that literally marks the arc of life and death. Here you have birth. All of these are images that the artist rips from the internet or rips from news feeds and places on this gold ground, this sort of transcendental gold ground, again, drawing very deliberately from the tradition of European paintings, in this case, the tondo. And then here is death, which is represented just by the feet of the feet in a morgue, an amazing painting of these foreshortened feet, but again, referencing an artist like Mantegna and referencing other painters in the European tradition. This was the centerpiece of the exhibition, the walking through life, beginning with birth, all the way through death, including these kind of existential moments of people looking down a well, kind of asking, where do we go, whither life, but again, this specific reference. And I was very interested in making the argument that this artist herself, her training, her national training was the Soviet-style socialist realist painting that had a direct lineage to the studios in Paris and the studios in Rome, where European realism was born. Yeah. So this exhibition was also very well received. The New York Times cited it as one of the top 8 hits of the Venice Biennale, and it gave me great joy in being able to see the work and with a very extensive catalog essays to kind of question the whole idea of what is cosmopolitanism, what is appropriation. There's this whole critique now of appropriation. And, if you're a Western artist, you can't use ink because you're appropriating, which I think is ridiculous. And I'm saying here is this Chinese artist whose entire visual language is the language of European realism, but it is her language because it was the language of the entire Maoist revolution. And it was the foundations of the entire academy in mainland China for the last, 70 years. So how can you take that away from her? How can you say you're not allowed to paint in oil painting and you're not allowed to paint in realism and you're not allowed to use figuration? So I think that we made that argument very strenuously. And I think with that, I can close my talk today. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. 谢谢你们。